Glad you're all here. Welcome to everybody. We're going to have an excellent presentation this morning, the first of two parts on human trafficking. We'll learn more about human trafficking and what's happening here and nationwide and abroad, about how the Franciscan sisters who are here are collaborating with officials in southeastern Minnesota, around the state and around the country, to help eradicate this modern-day form of slavery. And finally, how victims of traffic can and are being rehabilitated, and what kind of support they need to do that. In this hour, we're going to get a broad view of human trafficking as it's spread around the world, and find out that the United States has actually become the #1 destination for this modern-day form of slavery. And actually, Minnesota, and some of you may know this, I was shocked a couple years ago when some of their colleagues presented our spirituality grand rounds that Minnesota ranks number 13 as a state in human trafficking in the country for a number of reasons. I'll just briefly. One is the I-35 corridor, if you think about it, as that being a route of transportation of people. The second being that we have a harbor in Duluth, a port place where it's very easy to hide people who are being trafficked and harder to find them and get at them in that setting. And then third, the number of Native American reservations that exist in Minnesota where there are lots of difficulties in this area. So many young children as young as 8 years old are being kidnapped, sold, or tricked into slavery, and then used in a variety of ways: forced labor, sex slaves, domestic servants, and in the drug trade, and in establishing national sex trafficking networks. Very disturbing kinds of things. Let me introduce our two speakers. Sister Martha Matthew, both of them are Franciscans. She is a member of the Sisters of St. Francis here in Rochester. She has a background in nursing, both a bachelor's and a master's of science in nursing, and she's worked nursing in several states, including Minnesota, Iowa, California, and South Carolina, and has been an assistant nursing professor in 2 institutions in our state, St. Teresa's in Winona and St. Scholastica in Duluth. She's also worked, both of these women have extensive experience working in other countries and gives them a world perspective on this as well. She served 7 years in a free clinic in Bogota, Colombia, and is on a number of committees that are involved in bringing awareness to human trafficking locally and nationally. Sister Marlis Jacks, who I know because she's the director of outreach and for the Assisi Heights Spirituality Center in Rochester. We sometimes collaborate on some projects and speakers. That center specializes in spirituality, justice, education, faith development, ecology, and the arts. And she's engaged in human trafficking with her congregation and is one of the community educators in southeastern Minnesota. Her background is more in education, theology, and leadership training. And interestingly, I found has a degree in interior design. So I thought maybe while she was here, she could give us some tips for this room. We made it. We've got better chairs. We have a better projector. That's a start. We'll go. Maybe we can go from there. Her global ministries have included working in Cambodia and in East Africa, both in Kenya and Ethiopia, where she's witnessed trafficking firsthand. She's been very much influenced by poverty and lack of education, and how that contributes to human trafficking of girls and women within prostitution and workforce slavery. So please welcome Sister Martha and Sister Marlis.
Good morning and welcome. How are you this morning? Good to see you all on this wet day, I'll tell you. We're going to start out by saying, what is human trafficking? And Martha will answer that question for you. I think you have it on your little sheet as well, but
we gave you out a little pre-test just to see if you have some knowledge of human trafficking. And I've met some people who said they attended all of our events at Assisi Heights, so I think you would get 100 on that. Anyway, what is human trafficking? Well, it's the recruitment, harboring, obtaining, and sometimes transporting a person in either the sex trade or the labor trade for profit. It's a money-making business. In fact, it's over a $32 billion business, or $34 billion business worldwide, which is second to the drug trade internationally. And I'll ask Sister Marlis a question. How could you identify a person who might be trafficked?
Well, trafficking, for one thing you want to know is that the average age of boys or girls who are trafficked is 13. That's kind of alarming right there alone. Generally, they're runaways. They could be persons who are poor, people who do not speak English, people who use a lot of social media and are seeking help or somehow are living in a fearful situation. So there are a lot of indicators that give you a clue that they might be trafficked. So,
And I forgot to mention, the big issue is they're trafficked under force, fraud, or coercion. In other words, there's a fraudulent thing going on. It's usually undercover, and they're coerced. Usually, they're given drugs and alcohol, and the young person then is hooked. And that's called the seasoning process. And it's very difficult to get out of the situation.
so the question is, where do you find these sex trafficked persons? Well, you know, there's in any kind of situation. Massage parlors is kind of a popular one. Brothels, we don't have too many in Rochester, but we have strip clubs, escort services. Truck stops is a really popular one. But labor trafficking is a little bit different. We're going to be having a program on labor trafficking in the fall at the Heights again, and this is our first attempt at talking about labor. And that is generally domestic workers, construction workers, or people who work on farms, sweatshops. Though we don't have any sweatshops here, around the world they're very popular. So.
Now, the person often is controlled by a trafficker. I'm going to tell a situation. Last Monday in the Post Bulletin. Now, these were two women living together, and their pimp was in prison, I imagine locally. And the pimp controlled the woman who was the victim. She was 30 years old, and her sex trafficker who drove her around was 27. Often they're younger than that, but these persons had been involved for quite some time, I would think. Anyway, the pimp who was in jail locally, I believe, told the victim, "You are to go out and get some money to get me bail to get out of prison." So she answered an ad, probably on Backpage, which was a law enforcement undercover agent. They were to meet in Stewartville at a motel. And so when the woman who drove her, who I consider the trafficker, to Stewartville, to this motel, they got suspicious looking in cars, because we've had about 4 stings in Rochester picking up traffickers in this way. So they called the cell phone of the victim, and of the police officer, thinking he was the man wanting sexual favors. It rang, and she said, "Meet me just by the door of the motel place." And so he went there and arrested them. She said to him, "I just wanted a massage." Well, they had been previously convicted. They had a record, so he arrested them. And one of them was charged with a couple felony accounts, the trafficker, the woman, and the victim was given a gross misdemeanor sentence. That happened locally. Since 2010, our law enforcement in the city has become very active as we've done education. In 2010, when we had our first program at Assisi Heights, we had the county attorney, and he said, "I'm a novice at this. I know of one trafficked person in the city." Law enforcement that I called knew of no one. Well, since then, they've had 4 stings and have arrested about 68 persons.
So victims are, where do you find victims? Actually, they're in plain sight. As much as we kind of think that they may not be there, they really are very often. Domestic home disturbances sometimes are a clue. Routine traffic stops are another way. Like I said before, massage parlors, but bars are another place. The other ones that kind of might have some connection with it are healthcare workers who might, when a person comes into the emergency room, have been trained very well, actually, to ask the right questions to say, Where did these bruises come from? You know, why are you starving? Why are you not eating properly? What are some of the signs? And those are the people, and those are the signs that we look for.
Another thing, internationally, women are 80% victims. Of all the victims, women are 80%, and children are 50% of that number. Let's see.
So let's talk about some of the indicators now of labor service, for example. Kind of questions that you want to ask are, was the person recruited for a specific purpose to engage in a particular kind of job? Is the person's salary being garnished to pay off illegal debts or some other kinds of indicators? Was the person forced into any kind of sexual acts? Is the person a juvenile that's engaged in commercial sex, which is a whole different thing? And so, does the person work excessively long hours is another indicator, and unusual hours, maybe odd times. Is the person adequately dressed for their service in their job? Those are all indicators that you look for. So, why don't you talk about some of the control indicators?
All right, now the trafficker is controlling this victim. Like I mentioned, they're seasoned, the victim is seasoned with drugs and alcohol. Might be taken to a strip club the first time and then ending up in having sex with someone they consider a boyfriend. If it's a young person particularly, they are in love with this person. They don't realize that they are victimized. Now, how do you approach, say you see a situation, you don't approach the trafficker or the victim. You call law enforcement. Now that they're educated, they will know the service providers in the area. And how are they controlled? Usually the person will speak, the older person will speak for the person and answer questions, especially if they're in the ER. They will try to answer the questions. So you need to separate the person from the victim. Just tell them, you know, I need to do this exam, please leave the room, and they might put up a fight, but anyway. Have they been threatened, or the family threatened? Often that happens, that they tell the young person, and the person by this time is ashamed, feels guilty, what they've done. They don't want to call their parents right away and say, you know, this is where I am and this is what I've done. They need someone to intervene. They appear submissive and fearful. If they're from another country, they might be threatened with deportation. Their travel documents have been taken away. They have no identification. They might not even know where they are if they're transported. Just another fact I want to mention, internationally, persons coming into the United States are about 20,000 to 50,000 a year trafficked into the country, whereas the figure from the State Department is that there might be 100,000 already within the United States that are trafficked. So that figure is even greater within the country. They might be confused and afraid. They might not speak English. So they might not be able to contact friends or family. They had a cell phone, most kids do today, but that's been taken away.
A real quick story that I can tell you that happened to me on the way home from, I was at a conference in Ohio, and we stopped in Beloit, Wisconsin for the night, so we didn't have to travel the whole way. And we came into the restaurant. There were 4 of us, and there were 2 people ahead of us. And we were seated at booths right next to each other. And a very interesting fact happened. The gentleman was real irritated that we were being served first. So with his putting up this big fuss, we said, you know, take care of him first, which is what the waitress did. And he ordered a drink for the 2 of them. Okay, now he appeared to be about in his 60s. He had gray hair, whatever, very tousled, not very nicely dressed. And the young woman looked to be about 18, 19 with long blonde hair. So the waitress, in her ability, said, may I see your identification? And she kind of shrugged her shoulders, didn't really say anything. And she said, I need to see your identification before I can get this drink for you. And she said, I don't have any. Okay, that's clue number one. So the waitress did take their order for hamburgers or whatever. The gentleman left the booth and went all the way around to the back over there someplace, and on the other side ordered a drink for her and brought it to the booth. The waitress was very sharp. She picked up the fact that there were 2 drinks here and she only brought 1. So she didn't say anything, but she did get her manager to come over and said, I need to see the identification of this woman before I can do this. Well, in essence, she didn't have any. She said that the second time, I don't have any. And the gentleman was very irritated. So much so that he made such a fuss that we became really interested in what was happening in the booth next door. Anyway, the manager did take it away. So after they had their lunch and whatever and left, we asked to see the manager and ask him what he was thinking about when this is all happening and whether he thought it was human trafficking. And he did say he was suspicious of it. He has seen this gentleman before, but he had not seen the young woman before. That's all he said. But he said, I'm in a predicament. They did nothing wrong. I mean, I took the drink away. I did what I had to do. So there was nothing, he couldn't call there wasn't any information that he could give the police at that time. But I thought it was a very interesting kind of situation that I've never met before.
Another situation, looking at labor versus sex trafficking. Even though we've been focusing for a number of years on the sex trafficking going on, there's a lot of labor trafficking, especially internationally and in this country. You think of California with the migrant workers and domestics, nannies, and so on. Well, internationally, interesting, labor trafficking is 2/3 of all trafficking, and sex trafficking 1/3. You think of all the situations worldwide in the cocoa plantations, bringing chocolate to us, the clothes that we wear from sweatshops in Vietnam. I check my labels, they're made all over the world. And often they're child laborers, I guess in the diamond factories, and what else? Coffee factories I know in Colombia, coffee and chocolate both come from the Amazon area.
I can talk about Cambodia a little bit because one of the things that was prevalent in Cambodia is a lot of the families had large families, and in a sense they couldn't feed them all. So one of the things that parents, sadly to say, in Cambodia were doing is selling off one of their daughters, usually the oldest daughter, because she could go with this pimp or with this John or whoever to go to another country, and they would have one less child to feed. Or it might also be that they would sell their daughter to some other gentleman down the pathway. There weren't really big roads there at all. And as to reduce the debt that he had toward the other man, from the other man. So that was the kind of thing that was happening there. The other thing is, last year I went back to Cambodia to see the school that we built there in Battambang, which is the second largest city. And we went there also to visit a house that was built by Solimam, if any of you have read any of her books. She's a Cambodian girl who was caught in sex trafficking when she was 15, and now she's probably 35, 40, someplace in that area. And she has gone back and around the world has built these homes for girls who have been trafficked. This home in Battambang, Cambodia, housed 90 girls. I was just floored. It just gives me the shivers every time I think about it. The youngest one was 8. The oldest one was 23. They want them to leave around 18 or 19. But very often, some of those that were a bit older that were there, they felt were not capable of managing in society. And so they've kept some of these girls on a little bit longer.
And that brings up the question, what countries do we see international sex trafficking? Mentioned labor, but it's Cambodia, Vietnam are very large involved in sex trafficking. They have tourist stops in Cambodia where people from Germany, the US, wealthy nations come for that purpose. Eastern Europe, Russia, and Latin America are very involved in sex trafficking. I thought of something else when you were talking, but I forgot what it was.
What are some of the living conditions of these women? Well, you'll see not in this one, but there are some other videos that indicate it a little bit more. But generally they lack their own kind of possessions. They appear to be very unstable. They don't have any freedom of movement. They can't leave anytime that they want. Sometimes they're in a room or a building and never see the light of day. There are unreasonable security measures that are attached to them. They're very often deprived of food if they don't provide whatever else is needed, or sleep, or even medical care.
I know what I was going to mention. You've all heard about the 3 girls in Cleveland that were imprisoned for, I don't know how many years, 11 years or something. Very abusive situation. Grabbed off the street, enticed, one of them was enticed. The trafficker had a dog in the car and offered it for her child. So she got in the car. This is important. Never get in the car. Teach your teenagers with a stranger. And what we're telling parents now is have a list of who your child can ride with. And that child knows whether it's a parent, a grandparent, an aunt, or an uncle. But that child should have the list. So anybody else who offers them a ride, they are not to get in the car. You've heard of the girl who was actually killed. It was Crookston and Grand Forks. She was in a mall on her cell phone, grabbed by a man. His name was Rodriguez. She was Norwegian. I can't remember her name. Beautiful blonde girl. He enticed her. He grabbed her, told her to get in the car, and all she had on the cell phone, her boyfriend said, was okay. She got in, her body was found, I forget, a year later in a ravine. You've heard of J.C. Ducard, who was trafficked in California for something like 18 years, had 2 children with the couple, the man, and was picked up at the Berkeley campus by 2 alert police women. Saw her with an older man who looked, he was passing out religious literature. And then Susan Smart, the little Mormon girl who was grabbed out of her bedroom by a man who had been working on the roof. And she was discovered. When the policemen approached these persons and asked for their name, they gave their fictitious name. They're so frightened. And they're so, addicted, seasoned, whatever you want to call it, that it takes some questioning before they will admit who they are. I wanted to mention those very well-known cases. And then there's the local cases we've read about.
Yes, we had a meeting Friday, and at our meeting we heard that the 2 local cases, one is in Byron right now, and another one right here in Rochester. So we know it's happening here, whether we want to believe it or not. It is indeed in our geographic area. We're ready to do the film now, so
we'll turn the lights down and start the film. It's a 22-minute film on a young girl who was trafficked, and you'll see how easily she was caught into this situation.
We're working with what we have, and I was like, what do we have? And she's like, your body.
I didn't know about sex trafficking until I was in the middle of it.
After a while, you just kind of get used to it. Like, everything that goes around just doesn't seem out of ordinary to you.
We really believed that she was getting ready to be sold.
So, Brianna, how old are you?
I'm gonna get sticky. Let me join in.
Never listen to kids.
I think the most common way we've seen these traffickers or pimps get involved in these girls' lives is they pretend to be an older boyfriend. And really, again, we're talking about young girls that could be 12, 13, 14 years old, and perhaps they've never had a boyfriend. So to have this older male come into their life who's pretty charming, who's pretty charismatic, and suddenly paying attention to them like they've never had it before, offering to buy them things, offering to take them to dinner, to movies, have their hair done, their nails done, a tanning salon. This connection's made, and these young girls actually fall in love with these guys and believe that this guy loves them back. And then one day he asks for something, and even though she doesn't want to do it, she's so worried about losing him that she will. And once he's had her do it once, he pretty much can control her from then on, through shame, through drugs, through threats about family, physical beatings. But the reality is it can be any girl. And we've learned that through experience, unfortunately, that girls from good homes, girls that have good grades, do all the right things, can still be exposed to this. The 17-year-old girl that I'm familiar with, her name is Brianna. And Brianna comes from a small town, was an A student, an athlete, volunteered in her community, was a cheerleader, and attended college while going to high school. And she came into my life through a phone call I received on a Saturday night.
My name is Brianna, and I didn't know about sex trafficking until I was in the middle of it. I'm sure you're like me, where you think that sex trafficking wouldn't affect your life, but I'll tell you my story. I was from a small town and just really enjoyed being a part of the community. When I was in high school, I actually took college courses because I knew that I wanted to be a nurse. I was really excited about getting my education started, and I knew that I could really focus myself while I was in high school to get those A's I needed in college. I was waitressing and just doing a good job. I was always really friendly and would have conversations with my customers. What I didn't realize was that one of my customers, he was gathering information about me through our innocent conversations, where I was going to school, what my family was like, what I wanted to be. He was gathering information about me to eventually use it against me. I was just at work one evening, and some guys came in, and they were really cool. One, his name was Nick, and he was like 24. He played football at a university. He was tall and blonde, and he was super funny. We were just like laughing the entire time that he was having his meal. He told me that he was from Seattle, which I thought was just a coincidence. And I told him that, wow, I want to move there. And we were just flirting the whole time, and he was telling me how beautiful I am and making me feel good about myself. At the end of the conversation with Nick, he gave me his phone number, and we talked for quite a bit of time. I made a choice that night, but I found out that they actually had chosen me. When I decided to go up and hang out with Nick in Seattle, I couldn't tell my parents because they wouldn't let me. So since he was older, I had to make a lie to get around my parents. So I told them that I was going to hang out with my girlfriend for the day. When I got to Seattle, I pulled up to a gorgeous house. It was Victorian style, and it had a lake view. I was blown away. I didn't realize that when I was meeting his friends, they were actually shopping me. And they were seeing if they wanted to buy me or if they knew somebody that might want to buy me. So I didn't realize that his friends were traffickers too. And he was so smooth and came off so sincere and genuine. When I asked him how am I going to get a job, what am I going to do, he said, you could waitress, you're good at that. I saw you waitressing, you're good at that, but how much do you usually make in a night? And I told him that I usually make about $85. He told me to put a 0 on that 85, and that's how much I could bring in a night with the job that he knew of. He told me that his ex-girlfriend was a dancer and that it was really easy and that I could probably do it. And for a minute I considered dancing. I was thinking, well, probably isn't that bad. And then he said, okay, let's go to the strip club. I felt like if I didn't go to the strip club with him that he would look at me as just a child, as a kid. Here I am, I'm 18. I can go into a strip club at this point. And it was kind of like, if you don't, then you're not an adult. That's how I felt. The strip club was just really loud and dark. It was gross and it smelled. It didn't feel very comfortable, and it's like everything has this like sticky look to it. You don't really want to touch anything because everything's got germs on it. I felt kind of gross that I was even in there. I was only in the club for 2 nights dancing, but in that time frame, a lot of guys wanted to take me home, and one guy, he offered me $1,000 for an hour, and I couldn't believe it. So me and Nick talked about going to Arizona, and we both decided that I needed to return my dad's car. On my way to return my dad's car, I was calling friends to help me move out and get the car returned and then get me back up to Seattle. So the only friend that offered to help was my ex-boyfriend, and his name was Evan. I was surprised that he was going to help, but we just kept a really close relationship. We were good friends still. So when I got to his house, though, he was asking me so many questions. Evan was so concerned about where did they get all this money and why aren't they working. He was asking just these questions, and I was starting to realize that he didn't really want to help me. And then I realized that he was trying to talk me out of going to Arizona and moving out. And so I wanted to go. I wanted to leave. So on my way of walking out of Evan's door, his parents were there. I felt like Evan betrayed me because he called his parents and my parents to try to help convince me not to go to Arizona and not to move out. And, here I am, given all these opportunities to go to school in Seattle. I felt like it was a dream come true. I was going to Arizona for winter break, and they all didn't see it. I felt like my family and Evan, they wanted to keep me just in this little bubble, and that I'm just a child and I don't really know what I'm doing. So I was upset. I was really mad at Evan. I felt like he completely was ruining our friendship. He had lost my trust. And a woman walked into the room and introduced herself. Her name was Linda Smith, and she was a specialist in getting girls to recognize and flee from human trafficking. After a long conversation with Linda, I started realizing and recognizing that I was being groomed for trafficking, that I was in the middle of the process, and that it was almost too late. I thought Nick was the good guy and Evan was the bad guy, but now I realize he saved my life. Nick was grooming me to be trafficked. I started getting angry and upset. Linda, from all the stories that she was telling me, she told me one about a 13-year-old girl who was tricked on the night of her birthday.
Monday through Friday, never wanted to miss school. I love school, I love being around my friends, and my science class is my big thing. We were walking down the street, coming back from the little corner store, and there was these white guys out there, saying, yeah, there's a party. You guys should really come, and you guys would have fun. We were like, okay, well, we're going into 8th grade. We might as well get our first party out. Let's just go have fun. It was just a quiet neighborhood. And so we were like, it's cool. I mean, what could possibly go wrong? So we were like, yeah, this is harmless. It's one of those ones you see in a movie. It was fun. And I was sitting on the couch just listening to music. My friends were off dancing and stuff. And some really cute guy comes up and starts talking to me. And I'm just sitting there. He was really persistent on talking to me and trying to get to know me. He was 23 or something like that. I was at Starbucks ordering a drink and he had said, hey, do you remember me? And I was like, nope, sorry, nope, don't remember you. And he's like, okay, well, I'm pretty sure I remember you. I was like, okay, whatever. So I gave him my number and we talked for a little bit and hang out. And we'd go to movies and malls, trips and stuff like that. And it was pretty cool. I'd never had a boyfriend before. So it was cool. He bought me a dress and it was just really special to me. It was I felt I was a princess, a queen or something. And he used to call me his queen. I started thinking, he really did like me, and listening to all the dreams he was trying to sell. He wants to marry me and stuff like that. And he can't wait for us to move in together and have a life. He kept saying that he needed money and he was going to lose his cars and his house and stuff, and he's not going to have anywhere to go. So I was like, I'll help you, whatever. And so we went to the strip club, and it was just super uncomfortable. So I went out of the room and he started yelling at me and I was like, I'm not doing that, I want to go home. And he wouldn't let me go home till my shift was over. I was 13 when I started in the strip clubs. I signed up for track, and during track, I'd just kind of not go, and I'd go spend them with him or whatever. And then I started going to strip clubs for him, and what I'd do is we'd go to school on the bus, and then right when I got off the bus, I'd just kind of leave and go meet him down the street or something. And then just as the buses were pulling up, I'd be back on the bus, so it was I went to school. And I'd leave for weekends saying I'm at my friend's house, and whenever my mom would call on my friend's phone, we'd just three-way call it so it sounded like we were together, because my friends would cover for me. I was on the phone with him and he was cussing me out, saying, he didn't know why I even bothered with school, I wasn't going to be anything, because that's who I am. And I hung up the phone and I kind of dropped a couple tears. And I had this friend, Jordan, and she was like, why would you believe somebody saying that they love you when they treat you? And I really didn't have an answer for that back then. He loves me, that's all I could really think in my head. And that night, my first night, I got in the car with 3 people. They were all in their 40s and 50s, maybe older. Like, I don't know, I puked for about 30 minutes. Most of like my tricks and stuff were kind of old. I was scared, I was nervous. I didn't want to do it, but I couldn't come back without any money. He's kind of a very physical kind of person. He, like, you mess up something, he'll slap you, or, you know, depending on what you did, he'll, like, choke you out.
They were threatening to go get her 10-year-old sister. They were threatening to go beat up her family. And they had taken video of Lacey being raped the first night and threatened that they were going to use video of her having sex with other men to show to her youth group and to show to her school. She wouldn't have felt like she belonged anywhere. She didn't feel like she belonged with her pimp, but she wasn't safe going home. I just didn't know about trafficking and that there were older men preying on teenagers to bring them to a market to sell them. Traffickers go anywhere that there's a large group of girls or that girls frequent, like the mall or Starbucks. They'll go to arcades, anywhere that teenagers like to hang out at, parks, restaurants. Signs that you can watch out for your friends would be small tattoos or a tattoo of a name. Maybe your friend has an older boyfriend that she's trying to keep a secret, or she has new clothes that are really expensive, like a $300 purse or a really nice jacket. If your friend asks you to cover for her, don't do it. You're not doing her a favor. You could be helping her destroy her own life. And just like her, you don't know that what she's doing is so dangerous, but you'll never see her again. So what can we do to fight sex trafficking? I think the most important thing that we can do is get the word out. The only way to protect girls from sex trafficking is to be educated on what sex trafficking looks like. If you can't recognize the signs, you're not going to save your friend.
I think Evan was a true defender of Brianna. You know, he took a chance, he stepped out, he told the truth, he told what was going on with her. He violated her trust in the interest of protecting her. And I think that's a good lesson for us. Had he not done that, we might not have Brianna here with us today. I think what's important to understand is that these pimps have studied, preyed upon, stalked these girls. They do know where they live. They do know about their family. And when they threaten these girls don't feel safe. They don't feel that they have the ability to return home. And that was one of the questions we used to struggle with is, if this girl was doing something she didn't want to do, why wouldn't she just leave? And the fact is they can't see their way out of it. They don't see a safe way out of it. I would want to make sure that you understand where these guys are at. They're at your malls, they're at your stores, they're at places where kids congregate. Really, probably the biggest key is these older boyfriends. You heard Brianna talking about it. An older, mid-20s male has no business being around 13, 14-year-old girls, or even up to 18-year-old girls. So protect your friends. When we look back at Lacey's friends who really could have intervened at different points in her life and didn't, she's never seen those friends again. So the fact they thought maybe they were protected at the time really never helped her, and they've never been around in her life since.
Before we go on to questions, I want to mention the laws. We didn't talk about the laws in our country. Since 2000, we have had a federal law against human trafficking called the TVPA, Trafficking Victim Protection Act. That has been reauthorized about every 3 or 4 years. The last time was last year. What that does, it's three-pronged: prevention, which is education, what we're doing, prevention, protection, taking action, and prosecution. It is a felony to sex traffic. Now, in Minnesota, in 2011, we passed a safe harbor law, which was signed into law in 2012, I believe, by Governor Dayton. That protects children now from going to prison. If they're under 16 years of age, they are considered a victim and getting services to help them get out of the system, whether it's a place to stay, translation services, and so on. You want to add anything? Oh yeah, safe harbor law. That was passed, and that allows money from our state legislature, called the No Wrong Door. It's an addenda to that law. And we asked the state legislature last year for $13.5 million. We got $2.8. So in Minneapolis, Breaking Free is an organization that is building shelters. I think they had 4 beds at the time. They're building more shelters. There will be 6 regional directors in the major areas of Minnesota, 1 general director coordinating this program who has already been selected. They're in the process of selecting the regional directors. Rochester, I believe, will have one, Duluth, Worthington, and so on. What else? Now, questions.
Ready for questions now, if anyone has any questions. Yes.
I can talk. I'm loud. I have been to some of your presentations. They are very well done. How long have you been researching this project before you have done any presentations?
2009, in fact, some of our sisters, I would say 2007, started what we call a working group out of our Justice and Peace Network. And I got involved in 2009, and our first presentation was 2010. And so we had that time for researching, but we've become educated in the process. As our law enforcement, our county attorney, who has been marvelous in promoting education of law enforcement, and throughout the state, getting other county attorneys involved.
Yes, it's taken a long time to get up and running before you go out and speak about anything that you don't really know all the facts and details about. So that's, yes, it's been a long while. Another question?
Hi. Hi. Just a question. The film that you just used, is that shown in high schools? Is that available in high schools? And is there an age at which you recommend it?
Two-pronged. Number one, we are currently working at trying to get within the school system to be able to do it. We have not been able to cross that bridge yet for a variety of reasons. I'm not even sure what all the reasons are.
One thing we did do, we had 3 of our high schools in town. We asked 4 of them, or 5. I think 3 cooperated, John Marshall, Lourdes, and Century. One of our sisters is a drama teacher, And she went with Mission 21, a local organization working against human trafficking. They went to the high school drama departments and asked if they would cooperate in having their students research the problem and gave them some resources and then put on a one-act play. So 3 of the schools did, and those were presented to their classmates. So that's one way we've gotten in the high schools.
The other way that we're currently working on is to working through the health system, through the health, to the nursing program within the school, and to do it as part of their health curriculum. And that seems to be a better method of going at it and looking at it from what kinds of things can you do that would be helpful to you from the health perspective. So that's...
We've also talked about presenting to PTAs. I don't think we've gotten there yet, but any other questions?
Yes.
Why was the other high schools not cooperating?
Well, why did the other high schools not cooperate? Maybe a couple of reasons. One is that they had to have an adult leader that was willing at that point in time to help facilitate that. But some of them already had some projects in the process and felt that they couldn't give the time to to that project this year. So it was not because they didn't want to.
I want to mention one thing. I think the laws are very important and enforcing the laws. For example, in Sweden, they made trafficking a felony. I mean, it is in this country, but even a John, the buyer, it's a felony to pay for sex, to buy a person. And the victims are treated as victims. And that's what Minnesota is trying to do by treating these girls as victims, not putting them in detention. And it can be girls or boys. I'm sorry, since we're women, we're interested in the women, but.
Wasn't there, if I recall correctly, a couple of years ago around Christmas time, several arrests in Rochester kind of related to the hotel business?
Yes.
And I wonder if you'd speak about that, because there's so many visitors to Rochester for healthcare and other reasons, and what kind of goes on and what we might even be looking out for as we visit hotels and travel around as well.
Yes, there have been 3 stings that our law enforcement has carried out since we began this process, and other groups that throughout the country also have been educating. One big item is the internet. And often the trafficker or the pimp and the pimp go on the internet, on Backpage, and there are some other servers. So law enforcement poses as somebody wanting sexual favors and then conducts these stings. So they've arrested about 68 people or more. And the names, once they prosecute, I think are in the paper. So they've been local.
And the one that you're talking about, on that particular night, they did arrest 18 people here in town. The other interesting thing is the city of Winona has taken on an interesting piece in that if you work for the city or the county and you attend a conference, let's say Cincinnati or Miami or Hawaii or wherever, they will, if you go to a hotel that does not show pornographic, whatever, pay by view or whatever it's called. As you can see, I have never tried it. I can't even think of the name of it. Then they will pay for your hotel stay if you go to a hotel that does not offer these services. So, I mean, they're taking a real active role. We have tried working with our hotels here in town, and we have done some training with them as well as restaurant owners to look for particular kinds of behaviors or whatever. But they haven't made any kind of common statement as the city of Winona has, which I think is a great way to go.
There is a code of conduct that we've worked with our stocks in the airline industry and the hotel industry, and Delta has signed the code of conduct. There are 5 things basically that they're teaching their cabin attendants and so on to observe signs of trafficking and what to do about it. And don't forget the national number. It's very easy to remember, 1-800-3737-800 to call if you don't know who else to call.
It's my understanding that the local law enforcement have a kind of a SWAT team that goes around the streets at night and patrols the hangouts of the teenagers. My question is, what happens to a teenager victim if they do pick one up? Where do they put them? Is there a safe place in Rochester, or do they transport them to the cities?
Basically, the only place is the Twin Cities. We do have Mission 21 that has an advocacy house downtown. They tried to get a safe house. They couldn't raise enough money. The zoning laws were so strict that they had 3 different houses, but they couldn't meet the zoning laws. So they're going with now foster care. And they have training for foster families who want to adopt one of these victims. And they have 2 families just about ready. I just attended a meeting with Mission 21 on Friday night, and they have 2 families ready in this program. However, Breaking Free in Minneapolis has several programs going on. It was a black woman, Vednita Carter, who founded this in '96, I think, Breaking Free. They have a school for Johns, first-time offenders. It's very interesting, quotes, first-time offenders. It's a 1-day program, and they even come to Rochester at our law enforcement center 1 day a week and offer this program. They're barraged with videos and with former victims who talk about what they have done to their psyches, to their physical beings, and so on. And then they have a program for victims, it's a rehabilitation program, a 14-week program. By the way, the Johns pay $750 for this 1-day program. Anyway,
Would you advise the people in this room to lobby your school board members to have this shown at the high schools?
That would be great. I mean, any kind of help we can get to move it to a different level we'd happily welcome it, yes. Our time is up now. We do have some little cards here that says, look beneath the surface, and it's a real little thing you can put in your billfold that helps you to say, what do I do? So if you want one, pick one up. I'll put them back in the front or in the back.
And also, these are some internet programs, or internet sites. Well, thank you. If they want those. And, thank you very much.
I might just add that in the medical community, there are attempts to also communicate and find ways that women who are abused, either domestically here or from other countries, we have little cards that are the size of business cards that give them phone numbers and information in several different languages, in English and Spanish and Arabic, and they're in places in the clinic where only women are allowed, like in the back door of a bathroom or in the mammography area or someplace, and they're so small intentionally because many of these women are so strongly controlled that they couldn't be found carrying a card, so it's small enough to slip in their shoe, and then they can slip it in their shoe and get away, and then often still keep that without being found, and then have numbers to call to get help if they don't know anyway. And as I mentioned, they're in several languages, so that's a big yes.
Thank you for coming and for your interest. And
they do have some nice displays up here if anyone's interested in more literature and information.